Welcome to Obsession Engineering. Back in 1994, Triumph came up with a brilliant idea. They took their sports bike of the day, the Daytona 900, they took the fairing off it and they made the Speed Triple. It was brilliant and everybody loved it. 29 years later, it's gone full circle though. They've taken their Speed Triple and they've put a little fairing on it and some clip-ons and some fancy suspension and they've called it the RR. And today, I get to ride around on one. So this is my toy for the next few days. I've got this because I'm going to do some social media stuff with Rapid, so Triumph have lent me this lovely Speed Triple 1200 RR. And first impressions are, it looks lovely. The quality of the paint and fixtures and stuff is absolutely top drawer, and the bike in general just looks really, really cool. The little nose fairing at the front, I'm not sure it'll actually offer very much wind protection, but it does look cool, so that'll probably do it. The big gaps around the headlight are for sort of the air to funnel into the sort of air scoop at the front, so it has ram air. And yeah, it looks really, really smart. What have we actually got under the glossy paint? Well, the 1200cc inline 3-cylinder engine is claiming 197 horsepower and 125 foot-pound of torque, so that should be smooth and grunty and lovely. It has semi-active Olin suspension, so that looks lovely. It's got the newest sort of Brembo Steymer or whatever they call them brakes, so stopping and handling shouldn't be a problem. The only game will be, does this actually work on the road, or have they made it too stiff trying to make it too much of a sports bike? That we will find out in a little bit. It is keyless ignition, and I have the key in my pocket, so if I press that, the dashboard should come on, and it's a 5-inch full colour TFT dashboard, which is probably nicer quality than my TV at home, and it's doing something. Now it is, it's woken up. That looks cool. There are little carbon fibre trim bits down here which aren't actually terribly well fitted, so they sort of move around a bit, which is a bit disconcerting. It would have probably been quite nice if this thing was carbon fibre as well, but it's not. I may be nitpicking, but I am quite critical about everything in life. At the back there's an electronically controlled TTX Olin shock, so that should be good quality. Again, we'll see if the damping is set for the road or set for the track. It has on it some Pirelli Supercorsa sort of track-ish tyres. Now these are the SP, so they're the roady version of it, but it's a bold statement to put such sporty tyres on a road bike, even if it is the ultimate sports bike for the road. These will be good when it's hot and dry. Not sure whether they'll be very good tomorrow in Yorkshire when it's meant to be raining. At the back end here, there's a lovely sort of sculpted, smoothly blended in seat unit, and that looks really, really nice. And I can imagine the designers did an absolutely stunning job of making the shape of the bike all work together. And then of course they gave it to the engineers, and to make it road legal, they've had to put on this massive number plate hanger, which is actually in two bits. It's sort of this nice aluminium section and then some plastic afterwards. So that's not exactly attractive, but they have made it out of this lovely brush finished aluminium, so it is actually really nice, even though most people will take it off. It would have probably been even better if they'd have made it of the same aluminium to match all the rest of the footrest hangers and bits. So if they'd have made these in brushed, that would have looked even nicer. But enough of the talk. I'm going to put my helmet on, and I'm going to take us down to my favourite twisty back roads of Lincolnshire, and I'm going to see if the claim of the ultimate sports bike for the road is actually true or not.
I saddled up and headed out for my first ride on the Triumph down some of my favourite roads. But I didn't even get to my favourite roads before I found the first couple of niggles. The first two problems, if they'd have swapped them around, would have been ideal. The gear lever was lacking any positivity at all, and the throttle was the opposite and was really snatchy. If I'd have had a really direct gear lever and a really smooth throttle, I'd have been more than happy. But that's not what I got. Once rolling, the throttle wasn't a problem, and luckily the engine's that smooth and torquey you don't actually have to change gear that often. But there are niggles that don't need to be there. It only took another couple of miles to realise the next problem. The rear shock is too hard. This is always going to be a bit of an issue if you're trying to make a bike feel racy and sporty and then convert it to the road. And it is very fair to say that the shock is too hard. and I'm pretty sure it's a spring rate thing, not a damping thing, because irrelevant of what setting I put it in, it was still too hard. Talking of settings, there are several rider modes, and changing between them should be really easy, but for some reason it wasn't. The bike's just not particularly intuitive to get through the modes. Luckily, there are some good things to report as well. The engine is lovely. I'm not sure it's quite the 177 horsepower that Triumph claim, but it is lovely and smooth and lovely and torquey. It would be nice if it made a little bit more noise, but it's Euro 5, so it's not allowed to. The front brakes are sublime. They are more than you will ever need on the road, and I suspect more than 99.9% of people would need on track. They are excellent. To complement the brakes, the forks are also really nice. They give a lovely plush ride, and they just seem to work perfectly everywhere. Over the bumps, on the brakes, they're always working well. They are excellent. The chassis is also very, very good. The bike looks big, but it actually feels relatively light when you ride it. But it turns quite nicely, it's very neutral, and it never seems to get in a flap. It never seems to twitch or anything like that. I would like to tell you what it was like landing wheelies crossed up, but there's so much anti-wheelie control, I couldn't do it, and I couldn't work out to turn it off. So after a good few miles out on my favourite country roads, I was not entirely sold that this was the ultimate sports bike for the road. But over the next couple of days, I was going to do a lot more mileage on it to see what it was really like. Oh, I'm up in Hawes, so it has been a bit dirty. The local roads around here are muddy and bumpy, and these tyres don't work very well in those conditions, so it has been a bit slippy slidey fun. I'm pleased we had traction control. The rear shock is definitely too hard. The one thing I've really learnt on this trip so far is that the engine and the heated grips are so far my favourite things. Everything else I'm just a bit meh. After a good couple of hours sat on the motorway, where the screen offers no protection and the seat is too hard, getting out on some flowing country roads was exactly what I needed. Smooth flowing roads is where the Triumph comes alive. It has a playful side. You can wheelie it over crests, you can chuck it into corners. The chassis is really neutral, so it goes exactly where you want it and never gets into trouble, even when you're taking some liberties over the tops of crests. On damp Yorkshire roads, the ABS was a godsend, especially on supercourses. Although I would quite like to turn it off on the rear, just so you can back it in and have even more fun. So the more playful miles I did, the more I was growing to like the Triumph. It definitely has a fun side. So I've now spent a full day on the Speed Triple Double R, whatever they call it, and after the motorway slog, which wasn't particularly entertaining, riding around the Yorkshire Dales, having some fun with the lads from Rapid, doing some jumps and some wheelies and generally larking around has been great fun. And of course, this bike, I've now found its playful side. Over the crests and sort of down flowing quick little back roads and stuff, you can just hoist it up onto one wheel and you can play around with it, and it's great at doing that because the engine just drives to almost nothing. It's nice and quick, and the chassis is stable enough that you can sort of play around with it and it doesn't really get out of shape. Still not convinced about supercourses as road tyres, especially when it's been getting a bit drizzly, but in general I'm growing to rather like this Triumph. There are still a few little foibles, but it has definitely grown on me now that I've had some proper playtime. So now I've done another half a day riding around the Dales doing photo shoots and bits in decidedly mixed weather again, and it is time for me to head back down the A1 towards home. Dropped my bike. Ryan may be slightly complaining because I may have dropped his XR when I was doing a turn in the road. There was definitely some terrible cambers and the wind, and it's quite a heavy bike, and enough of the excuses. It's not my bike, I wasn't too fussed. So back to the important bike here, the little Triumph. The more I ride it, the more I do sort of kind of like it. I'm getting into it. Whether the ride back down the A1 will make me not like it so much is yet to be decided, but there's only one way to find out. Put my helmet on and head that way. So I left the dreary weather of Yorkshire behind and re-entered Lincolnshire, where the sun always shines. And after rattling through some more of my favourite back roads, it was time to draw some conclusions about the Triumph.
So over the last 2.5 days I've done well over 500 miles on the bike and I've drawn some conclusions. I think it's fair to say that my first ride on the bike was a bit like a bad first date. A pretty girl turns up and all I could really see to begin with were all the little niggles I didn't really like. Yes, the quick shifter is not the most positive on the gear change, the throttle is a little bit snatchy, there is basically no wind protection, the rear shock's a bit too hard. But these things aren't actually massive problems, they're just little niggles. And the more I rode it, the more I sort of started to forget about them basically. The gear change thing, what I've actually learnt is, especially if you get onto a nice flowing twisty road, put it in 4th gear and that's all you really need. So the engine is so nice and flexible and so smooth, and it sounds really nice when you get it revving, that the trick is you just leave it in 1 gear or 2 gears and you don't worry the gearbox too much, and then it's absolutely no problem. The rear shock is a bit firm. If you're a little heavier than me it might be okay, but for me it just made the ride a bit too jiggly. I've done most of my mileage in road mode. I found even in sport mode on a smooth road it was okay, but as soon as it got even a little bit bumpy it did get decidedly jiggly. So road mode, shock's a little bit firm, but the forks work really nicely and the brakes are on point. I would like a little bit less intervention from the traction control, which I should be able to turn down in the dashboard, but it's not terribly intuitive, and after faffing around a few times I can't entirely work out how to do it, so I just left it. It was a good safety blanket, but the blanket may have been a little bit tight for my liking. The engine, I've already mentioned it, but the engine is glorious. It makes a lovely noise, it's so flexible from about 3000 RPM upwards, it's just a joyous riot of noise and speed. It may not be the fastest thing in the world, but it is faster than you will need on the road, and it's just really nice to use. Sat on the motorway, the lack of wind protection isn't great. It is standard sports bike riding position, so it's not the most comfortable thing, but heated grips and cruise control definitely make life a bit easier. When I got this bike into the places it worked best, sweeping fast A and B roads, it is just a joy of a thing to ride. And the more I did that, the more I got really into this bike. Triumph claim it is the ultimate sports bike for the road. That is a very bold claim, and I'm not entirely sure it ticks that box completely. I think it might be the best looking sports bike you can currently buy, and it could quite possibly be the most interesting sports bike you could buy. So the big question is, if I had the money and the inclination to go and buy a brand new sports bike, would I buy one of these? Well, actually, having slated it a bit to begin with, I would actually be very tempted. I think the thing's lovely, the build quality is nice, I think it looks cool, and the more I ride it, the more I get into it, and it really is a really good bike. So there you have it. Lots of things I said to begin with are wrong, and this thing's lovely. Thank you for watching, and join me again next time for some more motorbike fun.